The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I'd woken up to the faint sound of something creaking. Our old apartment had its quirks. Pipes that groaned with the winter chill, floorboards that betrayed even the lightest footsteps. But this was different. It had a rhythm to it, steady and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. I turned over, expecting to find Emma beside me, but her side of the bed was empty. The pale moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft beams across the room. I sat up, blinking the sleep from my eyes, and there she was, standing by the window. Her silhouette looked strange, almost stiff, with her arms hanging limply at her sides. "Emma?" I called, my voice low and groggy. She didn't answer. I climbed out of bed, shivering as my bare feet touched the cold floor. When I got closer, I noticed her eyes were half closed. Her lips slightly parted as if she were mumbling something. Her gaze wasn't focused on anything. It seemed to drift, like she was staring at a point far beyond the glass. "Hey," I said, touching her shoulder gently. "You okay?" She flinched at my touch, but didn't look at me. Instead, she turned and walked out of the bedroom, her movements unnervingly smooth, like she wasn't entirely in control of her body. My first thought was that she was sleepwalking. I'd heard of people doing that, walking, talking, even cooking in their sleep. I followed her into the living room, where she stood in the center of the room, completely still, facing the wall. "Emma, you're dreaming," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Let's get you back to bed." She didn't move for a long moment, and I was about to repeat myself when she suddenly turned around and walked back toward the bedroom, brushing past me without a word. She climbed into bed and lay down as if nothing had happened, her breathing settling back into the slow rhythm of sleep almost instantly. I stayed awake for a while, watching her to make sure she was okay. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, just an odd little episode, and fell back asleep. The next morning, Emma had no memory of it. When I told her, she laughed it off, brushing a hand through her messy hair. "I've never sleepwalked before," she said. "I probably just had a weird dream. That seemed plausible enough, and we didn't talk about it again. But over the next few nights, things got stranger. It happened again 2 nights later. This time, it wasn't the sound of creaking that woke me. It was something softer, a scratching noise, subtle but constant, like fingernails dragging slowly against wood. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe a branch brushing against the window. But when I listened closer, I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. I turned over. Emma wasn't in bed. Cold knot twisted in my stomach. I got up quietly, trying not to make a sound. The scratching grew louder as I stepped into the hallway. It was coming from the kitchen. The overhead light was off, but the fridge cast a faint glow across the room. Emma was standing in the corner, facing the wall. Her right hand was pressed flat against it, and her left hand was dragging her nails down the plaster. Slow, deliberate strokes. "Emma," my voice barely came out. She didn't stop, didn't even flinch. Her head was tilted slightly, like she was listening to something on the other side of the wall. I moved closer, heart pounding. "Emma, wake up." Nothing. I wasn't sure if I should touch her. Something about the way she was moving, mechanical, almost ritualistic, made me hesitate. Finally, I reached out and grabbed her shoulder, giving it a gentle shake. She froze. Then, without turning around, she whispered something. I leaned in closer, my skin crawling. "What?" She spoke again, just above a whisper. "They're listening." Every hair on my body stood up. "Emma, wake up," I said more forcefully this time, shaking her harder. She blinked rapidly, swaying on her feet. Then she looked around, confused. What are you doing?" "No, Emma. What are you doing?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. She looked at the wall, saw the faint scratch marks in the paint, and backed away like it might reach out and grab her. "Oh my God. Did I?" "Yeah, you were scratching the wall, and you said they're listening." Her face went pale. "I don't remember any of that. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Neither did she." By morning, Emma was full of logical explanations. Stress, maybe. Lack of sleep. She'd been working longer hours, after all. People act weird when they're overtired, she said, trying to convince both of us. I nodded, but my mind kept circling back to the way she whispered those words. Like they weren't hers. Like someone else had spoken through her. I tried to forget it, tried to move on. But the next time it happened, there was no mistaking it. Something was terribly wrong. For nights later, I woke up gasping for air. It felt like something heavy was sitting on my chest. But when I bolted upright, nothing was there. The room was still, except for the sound of the wind rattling the window pane. Emma wasn't beside me. I didn't need to call out for her this time. I already knew she was somewhere in the apartment, lost in whatever dark place her mind had been drifting to. But tonight felt heavier, like the air itself was thicker, harder to breathe. I got out of bed, moving slowly. The apartment was steeped in darkness, but a faint glow flickered from the living room. The TV was on. Static. We hadn't used the TV in days. I always turned the power strip off before bed. Yet here it was, crackling with white noise, casting erratic shadows across the walls. Emma was sitting on the floor in front of it, cross-legged, her back to me. She was leaning slightly to the side, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, watching the static like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. "Emma," I called softly, my voice catching in my throat. Her head twitched, just barely, but she didn't turn around. I swallowed hard and inched closer. The sound of the static buzzed in my ears, too loud, as if it filled the entire room. I moved to the side, slowly, to get a glimpse of her face. Her eyes were wide open. She wasn't blinking. Her lips moved, forming silent words I couldn't understand. And then she laughed. It wasn't her laugh. It was soft, breathy, and completely emotionless, like she was mimicking what laughter was supposed to sound like. "Emma, wake up," I said louder this time. "Wake up, wake up." Her head jerked toward me, eyes blank, and she whispered something under her breath. I leaned in, straining to hear. "It's in the corner." I froze. "What is?" I whispered back, my skin crawling. Her eyes didn't move. She kept staring at the TV, but her hand slowly lifted, one trembling finger pointing to the far corner of the room. I turned, half expecting to see something standing there in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the empty corner. Still, I couldn't make myself move any closer to it. The longer I stared, the more the shadows seemed to deepen, like they were bending inward, folding into themselves. I grabbed Emma by the shoulders and shook her hard. "Emma, wake up," she gasped, her body jolting, and looked around wildly. What's going on?" "You were sleepwalking again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You turned on the TV. You were talking." She hugged herself, trembling. I don't remember." I shut off the TV. The apartment felt suffocating in the sudden silence. Neither of us slept after that. The next day, Emma insisted on buying melatonin and herbal teas, convinced it was just some sleep disorder. She scheduled a doctor's appointment, said it was probably anxiety. I wanted to believe her, but that night, I found myself staring at the corner she had pointed to, long after Emma fell asleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, watching, waiting. I started locking our bedroom door at night. I didn't tell Emma. I didn't want to scare her, or maybe I didn't want to admit to myself how scared I was. But after what I saw in the living room, I couldn't just go to sleep like nothing was happening. So every night, once Emma was asleep, I quietly turned the lock. It made me feel safer, for a while, until the night I woke up to the sound of the doorknob turning. It was slow, deliberate, a soft click, click, click as the handle gently twisted back and forth. I froze. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I was imagining it. But then I heard it again, more insistent this time. My eyes darted to Emma. She was lying on her side, facing the wall, breathing evenly, still asleep. Then the sound stopped. I held my breath, listening. And then came the scratching, fingernails dragging slowly down the door. It started at the top, impossibly high for Emma to reach without standing on something. and moved all the way down to the bottom. Over and over. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just stared at the door, waiting for the handle to turn again. But it didn't. After what felt like hours, the scratching stopped. I sat there in the dark, wide awake, staring at the door until the first light of dawn bled through the blinds. When Emma finally stirred, she stretched and yawned like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been trying to claw her way back into the room. Or maybe it wasn't her at all. I didn't say anything. How could I? What would I even say? But that morning I checked the door. Faint scratch marks. 5 long, thin lines, right where I heard the sound. They weren't deep, but they were there. Real. Emma noticed me staring at the door. "What are you looking at?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Nothing," I lied. "Just tired." But that night I didn't lock the door. I barricaded it. I dragged the dresser in front of it, shoved a chair under the handle, anything to keep it shut. Felt ridiculous, over the top, but I didn't care. I had this gut-wrenching feeling that if she, or something, got in again, I wouldn't wake up in time. But that night was quiet. No scratching. No turning handle. Nothing. Until I woke up the next morning and found Emma standing by the window, staring down at the street. Her hand was pressed flat against the glass, like she was waiting for something, or watching. I started staying up later than Emma, pretending to scroll on my phone while she drifted off. I told myself it was to protect her, but the truth was I was afraid to sleep. 2 nights after the scratching at the door, I was still wide awake when Emma turned over and mumbled something in her sleep. First, it sounded like a regular dream. Quiet, incoherent words. But then her voice changed. Lower, slower, like someone else was speaking through her. I leaned in, barely breathing. "Let me in." I froze. She said it again, softer this time. "Let me in." My skin went cold. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady, but her lips kept moving. Couldn't stay in bed. Quietly, I slipped out of the room and sat in the hallway, staring at the bedroom door. I didn't lock it, didn't block it. I just sat there, waiting. I don't know how long I sat like that, knees pulled to my chest, every muscle tense. Hours maybe. The apartment was silent, but the kind of silence that feels full, like the air was pressing in around me. And then I heard it. A soft knock. Not from the front door. From inside the apartment. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. It was coming from behind the bathroom door. I didn't move. Couldn't. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Emma was in bed. I was the only one awake. But the knocking came again. I stood up, legs trembling, and stared at the bathroom door. It was shut, but the light was off. I hadn't been in there all night. Slowly, I reached for the doorknob. I stopped, because I heard it. A voice. Soft, breathy. It was Emma. "Let me in." But Emma was asleep. In the bedroom, I backed away, step by step, until I was pressed against the cold wall. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight. The voice behind the bathroom door spoke again. A little louder this time. I said, "Let me in." I ran. I don't even remember getting back into the bedroom, but I locked the door and shoved the dresser back in front of it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Emma didn't stir. She stayed asleep, her face peaceful, like none of this was happening. I sat on the floor, staring at the door until morning. When Emma woke up, she looked at me with this concerned, almost worried expression, like she knew something was wrong but didn't want to ask. Neither did I, but for the first time I started wondering if Emma was still Emma. The next day, I couldn't stop watching her. Every little movement felt off. The way Emma would stand too still for too long. How she'd stare at things without really seeing them. She'd blink slowly, like waking up from a thought, then smile like nothing was wrong. I didn't bring up the voice behind the bathroom door. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, did you happen to be in 2 places at once last night?" Whispering to me from the dark? Instead, I acted normal, or tried to. Emma noticed, of course. "You're being quiet today," she said over dinner, stirring her pasta without eating it. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just tired." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. You should get some sleep. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Like it wasn't a suggestion. Like it was something I needed to do. That night, I set up my phone on the dresser, pointed at the bed, and hit record. I didn't tell her. I needed to know what was happening when I wasn't awake. I barely slept, drifting in and out, heart pounding in my chest. The next morning, Emma was already in the kitchen, making coffee like any normal day. I muttered some excuse about checking emails and went back to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and played back the recording. The first few hours were uneventful. Just the sounds of us breathing, the creak of the mattress as we shifted in our sleep. Then, around 3:17 a.m., Emma sat up. I watched the screen, breath held. She didn't move for a long time, just sat there, staring straight ahead. Then she spoke. Not sleep talking, not mumbling, clear, slow. He knows. I felt cold all over. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to something. Then, quieter. Should I do it now? Silence. Then, almost reluctant. Okay. Emma slowly slid out of bed. I watched, paralyzed, as she crept toward my side of the bed. Closer, closer. She stood there for several minutes, staring down at me. Then, without warning, she turned and walked out of the room. The video ended there. I sat frozen, staring at the dark screen. Who was she talking to? What was she talking to? And what did she mean by, should I do it now? I didn't confront her. Couldn't. Not yet. But that night I didn't sleep at all. And I didn't turn off the lights. The lights stayed on all night. Every lamp, every overhead fixture. Felt ridiculous, but the dark was starting to feel wrong. Like something was waiting in it, watching. Emma didn't say anything about the lights. She just climbed into bed like normal, pulling the blanket up to her chin. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, pretending. At some point, Emma rolled over and whispered, "Can you turn the lights off? It's too bright." I stared at the ceiling. My mouth was dry. Not tonight. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a softer voice, "You're making it angry." I didn't respond. Couldn't. Eventually, her breathing evened out, and she drifted off. But I didn't move. I just watched the walls, waiting. It must have been close to 3 a.m. when I noticed it. The shadows. They weren't moving right. The light from the bedside lamp cast soft shadows across the walls. But one of them didn't belong. It was in the far corner of the room, stretched unnaturally long and thin, like something was standing just out of sight. But nothing was there. Nothing to cast it. I stared at it, unblinking. It shifted. Not like the flicker of a candle or the sway of a curtain. It leaned forward. Closer. I sat up slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Emma didn't move. I watched the shadow inch toward the bed, stretching unnaturally along the wall, thin as a thread. And then Emma spoke, but not in her voice. Low, guttural, like it came from somewhere else. "Don't look at it." Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her eyes were still closed. She was still asleep. But that voice wasn't hers. And the shadow stopped. It hung there, motionless, like it was waiting. I didn't dare move. For hours, I sat frozen, watching the corner until the sun started to rise. When the morning light spilled into the room, the shadow was gone. Emma woke up, stretched, and smiled like nothing had happened. "Sleep better?" she asked. I just nodded. But I knew something now. It wasn't Emma that was watching me. It was whatever was in that corner. And it was getting closer. By now, I wasn't sure who I was more afraid of, Emma or whatever was in that corner. The next day, I tried to act normal. We ate breakfast, talked about nothing. But every second felt like a balancing act. Like if I said the wrong thing, everything would come crashing down. Emma seemed lighter, happier even. She hummed while making coffee, swayed slightly to some tune in her head, like she was relaxed. But I wasn't. That night, I hid a kitchen knife under my pillow. Not because I thought it would help, but because doing nothing felt worse. Emma fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling, gripping the handle of the knife so tightly my hand went numb. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of the bedsheets rustling. Emma wasn't next to me. My heart stopped. I didn't move. I just listened. The apartment was dead silent. Until I heard it. The soft scrape of metal against metal. I slid my hand under the pillow, but the knife was gone. My pulse hammered in my ears. I slowly sat up, scanning the room. Emma was standing in the corner. But not the corner. Not the one with the shadow. She was standing by the dresser, holding the knife. Her back was to me. Her head was tilted down, staring at the blade in her hands. She was turning it over slowly, like she was studying it. Couldn't breathe. "Emma," I whispered. She didn't move. "Emma, what are you doing?" Slowly, she turned her head toward me. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. And then, in a voice so soft I barely heard it, she said, "It said I should use this." My stomach dropped. "Emma, put it down." She didn't react. Instead, she started walking toward the bed. Slow, steady. I scrambled back, my legs tangled in the sheets. "Emma, put the knife down." She didn't blink, didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the bed, crawling, knife in hand. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and swung it hard. It connected with a sickening crack, and she collapsed onto the floor, the knife clattering from her hand. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't stop to check if she was breathing, didn't stop to think. I sprinted out of the apartment and into the freezing night air, barefoot, heart exploding in my chest. I didn't go back. Not that night. Maybe not ever. But as I stood there in the cold, gasping for breath, I realized something that turned my blood to ice. When Emma spoke to me, she wasn't talking about me. She was answering something else. Something that had been in the room with us the whole time. I sat in my car until the sky turned gray. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just stared at the dark windows of our apartment, half expecting to see Emma standing there, watching me. But she never appeared. By morning, I started to convince myself it hadn't happened the way I remembered. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I hit her too hard. Maybe... No, I saw the knife in her hand. I saw the way she moved, like something was guiding her, like she wasn't there anymore. Still, I had to go back. Couldn't leave her like that. The apartment was silent when I opened the door. I stepped inside slowly, listening for any sound, but there was nothing. The air was heavy, stale. "Emma?" I called out. No answer. I crept down the hall toward the bedroom, half expecting her to jump out at me. But when I pushed the door open, the room was empty. The knife was gone. But worse than that, the corner was darker. Not just in shadow, but darker, like the light refused to touch it. The same corner Emma had pointed to that night. Couldn't look at it. My eyes slid away without meaning to, like my brain wouldn't let me focus on it. That's when I noticed something else. Scratches. Not on the walls, on the ceiling. Long, jagged claw marks, as if something had been crawling above us while we slept. Above the bed. I backed out of the room, my breathing shallow. And then I heard it. A soft creaking like weight shifting on the floorboards. Coming from above me. The attic. I'd forgotten the building even had one. A small square hatch in the ceiling of the hallway. I stared up at it, the pull string hanging loosely. It swayed slightly, even though the air was still. Something was up there. I should have left. I should have run. But something made me stay. Maybe I needed to know. Maybe I thought if I saw it, it would make sense. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and stood on it, reaching for the string. My hand trembled as I pulled. The attic door creaked open, releasing a slow, musty breath of air. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I didn't want to look, but I did. Dust and cobwebs hung from the low beams. Insulation was torn up, scattered everywhere. And in the middle of it, something glimmered. I climbed up slowly, the beam creaking under my weight. In the center of the attic was a small pile of objects. Our things. My watch, Emma's earrings, the missing knife, and something else. A crude drawing on the wooden floor, scratched deep into the boards. Circles. Symbols. I didn't recognize any of it. And handprints. Small, dark handprints surrounding the symbols. Not Emma's. Not mine. Smaller. Then I heard it. From the far corner of the attic. Breathing. Shallow. Wet. I didn't wait to see what it was. I scrambled down, nearly breaking my ankle as I hit the floor. I grabbed my keys and ran, slamming the door behind me. But as I fumbled with my car door, I saw something in the reflection of the window. Emma, standing in the apartment window, smiling. But it wasn't her smile. And it wasn't Emma anymore. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I sat in my car, staring up at the apartment window where Emma had been standing. But now the window was empty. No sign of her. No movement. I could have driven away. I should have. But something told me it wouldn't matter. Whatever had taken hold of Emma wasn't something I could outrun. I had to end it, or die trying. The knife, the symbols in the attic, the voice behind the bathroom door. It was all connected. I didn't have a plan. Just a sick, gnawing feeling in my gut that I needed to confront it before it finished whatever it had started. I went back inside. The air was colder than it should have been. Still heavy. The lights flickered when I flipped the switch. The apartment wasn't empty anymore. I could feel it. Something watching. Waiting. Emma? My voice barely carried through the silence. No answer. But I knew where she was. The bedroom door was cracked open. Inside, the knife lay on the bed, laid out neatly, waiting. And Emma was standing in the corner. That corner. The dark one. The one that had been wrong since the beginning. She was facing the wall, motionless. Emma, I said more firmly this time. Her head twitched at the sound of my voice, but she didn't turn around. Slowly, she lifted her hand and pressed it flat against the wall, the same way she had against the window, only now the wall moved. It rippled under her touch, like something alive was pressing back. And then she spoke, soft, distant, but not to me. It's ready. Couldn't breathe. The wall started to bulge, swelling outward, as if something on the other side was pushing through. I grabbed the knife from the bed without thinking. Emma! I shouted. She turned to me slowly, but it wasn't Emma. Her eyes were too dark, too empty. Her mouth stretched into a thin, unnatural smile. You're too late, she said, but it wasn't her voice. I lunged. I didn't know what else to do. I drove the knife into the wall, into the thing where the bulge was pressing through. The wall let out a sound. Not a crack. Not wood splintering. A scream. High-pitched and wrong, like metal twisting under pressure. The room shook. Emma, or whatever was inside her, let out a shriek and staggered back. Her body convulsed, her limbs jerking in ways no human should move. I stabbed again. And again. The wall split open, not like drywall, but like flesh. Something black and oozing poured out, spraying across the floor. The screaming didn't stop. Not until the wall finally buckled and collapsed inward. And with it, Emma dropped to the floor, unmoving. I stood there, gasping for air, the knife slick in my hand. Silence. No more movement. No more whispers. Just silence. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, Emma stirred. Her eyes opened, clear and wide, full of confusion and terror. What happened? She whispered. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because even now, I'm not sure if it's really her, or if it's still waiting, somewhere in the dark. Watching. Waiting.